and welcome to On Farm. It's Anna here with you again this week. And another interesting one for you from SEFARI. If you are a livestock farmer, I think it's probably safe to say that you are on the front line of a global challenge. In fact, a battle against what the World Health Organization say is one of the top global public health and development threats. And that threat is anti-microbial resistance, by which, of course, I mean the increasing resistance of many germs and pathogens to treatments like antibiotics and other drugs. Now, as a livestock farmer, you'll probably already be aware of this, but it's a hugely interesting and important topic, and one that sometimes farmers can come in for some criticism over. So it's time this week to hear from the real experts to give us chapter and verse on what it means and what farmers and wider industry can do about it. So this is the third episode in our special series in partnership with the amazing scientists and researchers at Scotland's various SEFARI institutes. It's quite simply time to bring in the experts who are here to guide us through this very important topic. And I can guarantee we will all learn something. It's fascinating.
I'm Eleanor Watson. I'm from the Moredun Research Institute, and I'm a principal scientist focusing on AMR in wildlife and zoonosis as well.
I'm Karen Scott. I'm a gut microbiologist based at the Rowett Institute in Aberdeen, and I work on antimicrobial resistance in gut bacteria, both from humans and animal sources.
My name is Nuno Silva. I'm a research scientist here at Moredun. I'm led the AMR group here, and my research interest is related understand AMR selection and AMR spread at livestock farm level.
Now, antimicrobial resistance. I have got to admit, I am no scientist. So the first thing I did when I knew that we were covering this topic today was put those three words into Google. The first thing that came up was Global Public Health Challenge, which to me is quite an intimidating set of words. Now, I know we're going to be talking about humans, livestock, soils, wildlife, and everything, but I think what that Google search did for me is just highlight the importance of the James Hutton Institute and Rowett and Moredun and everybody in SEFARI in terms of looking at this and how it impacts upon, in our context, how it impacts upon Scottish agriculture and Scottish livestock and crop production, because ultimately we are a farming podcast.
Yes, so a brief description of what are antibiotics, what are antimicrobial resistance. So antibiotics are miracle drugs that target specific components or pathways in the bacteria. They can inhibit the bacteria growth or even cause the death of the bacteria, and then the bacteria cannot grow anymore, and it's a way that you control the infection in human infection. However, when the bacteria is over exposed to antibiotic, they can develop resistance, and then the drugs stop to be effective against a particular infection, and then the human, the animals can be more sick, and it can cause the death. And because animals and humans, also including the environment, are not alone, we try to use the One Health approach. So One Health recognizes that animal health, human health, and environment health is all interconnected. The links between the human, the animals, and the environment, it can improve the overall and in some way prevent the spread of the disease between these three sectors.
You know, that was a fabulous summary. We would love to understand from your team what exactly the work is that you're doing and how this is going to have a positive impact upon the livestock sector and livestock production. So, Karen, can you maybe kick us off and tell us a little bit, really, I suppose, about what your job involves on a day-to-day basis?
Basically, it links back to what Nuno was saying about the sort of One Health aspect and the interconnections between humans, animals, and the environment. So basically, if we look at antimicrobial resistance in livestock, farmers have become more and more aware of the problems of using antimicrobials in livestock over the last decades. And there's a lot less indiscriminate use now. But you still have to use antimicrobials if the animal's sick. I mean, that's your duty of care to the animal. So you can't stop using them altogether. So what we're trying to do is see whether the antimicrobial resistance genes that Nuno mentioned, that happens if you get a lot of overexposure to antimicrobials, you get these resistance genes that are carried by bacteria. And they can be carried by bacteria that cause disease, but they can also be carried by bacteria that are always present in every environment. So the microbiome that's necessary for healthy functioning of the animal gut, the human gut, the soil, all of those environments are full of microbes that are really necessary and essential. But those microbes can also develop and carry resistance. So what we're trying to do is look at those microbes that are in the animals, see what resistance genes are present there, and then compare them to whether the same genes are present in the soils, whether the same genes are found in the humans, and that gives us an indication of the sort of flow of those resistance genes in the sort of circular cycling of them through the environment. So that's one of the aspects of the work that we're doing. And in terms of the livestock, anything that's in the animal, in the gut environment in the animal, is excreted in the fecal matter. And that then forms the manure that then goes out and gets spread on the field. So there's an obvious route for transmission of any genes from the animal more into the environment, which is where Nuno's work comes in then to try to see what's happening at that aspect. So we can't overstress the sort of One Health aspect of it, that all the health of the animal, the human, and the environment in terms of the antimicrobial resistance is really strongly connected. And antimicrobial resistance is not just about bacteria that make us sick, the so-called pathogenic bacteria. It's also about all the other bacteria that are present in those environments all the time and are really important for proper functioning in each of those environments.
Just so that we can all understand then, from a practical point of view, how do you go about this research? Do you have a group of, I suppose, what we might call in the industry sort of monitor farms that you work with? Do you have your own farm? How does it work?
So some of our studies use specific farms, but then another study that feeds into these studies involves other farms that we just have recruited from around about Scotland. So we go out to normal working farms and see if the farmer's willing to be part of a study, and then we tell them what is involved, and they ask them, can they supply us samples? So for the study that I was talking about there, we've been getting samples from 7 different farms around Scotland, and we've got samples from the animals, like the manure and fecal material of the animals, which was quite easy to get, but we also wanted samples from the humans on the farms. And I have to say that was much, much harder. Farmers can deal with animal poo very happily, but they were very reluctant to give us samples of their own poo, which I found quite amusing, actually.
But, actually, joking aside, that's kind of the whole point. It is the One Health thing. So you can't study one without the other. Nuno, can you tell me a bit, as Karen said, perhaps tell me a bit more about, the practicalities of this research, and farmers are a unique bunch, and yet you fundamentally require their cooperation for such a huge proportion of what you do. How does that all work?
So basically, we are working in different projects. I can give you the example. A small survey that we have done for AMR related with pathogen that cause intermammary infection in the sheep. We contact different farmers spread through all Scotland, and then they send milk samples from the episodes of mastitis. Then we isolate the bacteria and study the AMR pathogens. We are using research farms. So it's research farms linked with our institute, and also a research farm linked with University of Glasgow. It's a control environment, so we are control what we are study, and in this project we are looking to see the risk of using different organic waste as fertilizer compared with the combustion in organic fertilizer. This can involve solid manure, slurry, sludge, and the antibiotics used in animals, it can end up in these manures or slurry, and then when you spread in the soil, for example, for the grasslands or even for crops culture, if you select AMR in the gut of animal, you can spread to the environment. In that case, for the soil. And our work is to look that risk, the risk of the use of manure to the environment, and then to human, when humans are in contact with the environment or even in contact with animals.
You are all scientists, not economists, but I suppose the question linked to that then is in terms of inputs for the farmer and whether or not this is economically viable over and above artificial fertilizer. Is that being looked at as part of the project by others, or is that kind of not considered to be within your remit?
It is something that people are really looking at. It's not something that we're looking at within these specific projects, but it is really important because whatever solutions we come up with, whatever interventions there might be in the future, that has to be cost effective. It has to be easily implemented and understood. So it's really important for us to keep working with the farmers to make sure that we come up with solutions that are effective and reasonable.
Karen, I know you've got a contribution to make as well on this topic.
So the thing that we're doing is trying to see what potential unintended consequences there might be to move away from inorganic fertilizer into very much organic fertilizers, whether it's manure or biosludge from human sewage works. And as long as there's no negative consequences, then you can really move to replacing the expensive inorganic fertilizers with these alternatives. And we really, as a country, we need to have a solution to getting rid of all the sewage from both human and animal waste products. But we don't want to do that at the expense of the quality of the soils, whether that's in terms of their carriage of antimicrobial resistance genes or even in the sort of quality of the soil microbiome. Because if you dump an awful lot of extraneous compound on top of that, you are going to affect the soil microbiome. So that's one thing that we need to think about. So this research really is laying the groundwork for what direction we can go in afterwards.
I'm just thinking about this, from a kind of lay person's perspective. How causal is the link ultimately between AMR resistance in livestock through then to humans, and how much have you been able to understand of that link and that connection?
How cause and consequences are really hard to get to the bottom of. So that is quite a tricky question to answer. Historically, when we were throwing antimicrobials right, left and centre, and they were widely used on farms, the resistance level of bacteria increased dramatically, both within the farm and in the human environment. And that's really what's caused this global health challenge that you mentioned at the beginning. So I think the real trigger for the global health challenge has been overuse of antimicrobials in the clinical setting, but also on the farm setting. What we're battling with now is how do we redress that challenge that we've created? So we've created this big challenge. So how can we backtrack from that? And that's proving a lot harder than I think scientists thought. Back in the early 2000s, we realized that excessive use of antimicrobials was an issue. And so farmers in the EU it was really emphasised that we had to decrease the use of antimicrobials on farm. And farmers across the EU did that a lot and have had to do that because the legislation was such that they had to do it. But it hasn't had the same impact on reducing the level of resistant bacteria that was expected, because I think it was thought initially that as soon as you took antibiotics away, the bacteria would realise they didn't need the resistance genes and they would just lose them. But I think that what's the reality is that the bacteria haven't lost those genes to the same extent that was anticipated. And so the resistance is still there. And whether that's because we haven't been able to eliminate all those resistant bacteria. So they're still loitering around the environment and in the guts, and so they're recolonizing whenever they need to, which is probably one big factor. So I think we need to find alternatives to that.
We're talking a lot about the spread in this podcast, but it's also worth thinking about efforts to sort of reduce overall disease in livestock as well. And in turn, that will decrease the use of antibiotics. So things like improved vaccines and diagnostics and disease control programs, understanding these things a wee bit better.
Yeah, it's prevention as well as cure, I suppose, than the whole integration between those two things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think prevention's always the best way to go forward, really.
Yeah. Nuno, you've got your hand up as well. Don't want to leave you out.
I want to highlight as well. In the last 10 years in the UK, we have done a good job for the reduction of antibiotic use in the livestock. This is due to mainly to the farmers, also the vets. For example, we have reduced in the UK approximately 6% of the quantity of antibiotic in terms of sales, and this have decreased about 60% in the last decade.
So farmers have done a great job in reducing the amount of antimicrobials that have been used recently, because I think farmers they're just as aware of anyone else, and even more aware of the antimicrobial resistance crisis that we are facing. There's a lot of moves among farmers and a lot of communication between farmers about alternatives to keeping animals healthy that don't need antibiotics. And I think this is great, and it's really the way forward as well. And I think some other research that's going on around the UK and the EU really is focused on alternative practices to avoid the use of antimicrobials altogether. Because if you can start off the animals in early life, really is a big time when you need to focus on keeping the animals as healthy as possible, and then that sort of seems to travel on through later life as well. It's the same in humans as well. Early life exposure is always really important. We are definitely moving forward on this. I don't want, the farmers are doing really great jobs in reducing the use. But I think what was interesting to me when we were interviewing our farmers for our study was that they were very aware of the spread of antimicrobial resistance around the farm, but there was much less awareness of what possible effect that could have on them as a farmer.
Ah, I see. Yes.
Whilst they were fully keyed into the environment and the animal part of it, certainly not all of them had made that connection to their own selves, if you want.
Is it much more likely to transfer to the farmer because he or she is working in such close proximity? Is that an obvious statement, or am I barking up the wrong tree?
Well, it's a logical statement, but to my knowledge, there's not been real evidence out there. So that's what we're trying to get, is the evidence. We're comparing the farmers with urban dwellers who've not been on farms. So we're trying to make that connection more specifically, but there's sort of parallel research that's been done over the years where you see that somebody who's got a pet, the pet influences the person's microbiome. So if you're brought up in an environment with an animal, then your microbiome's more diverse and actually better. So that's not about antimicrobial resistance, but that definitely shows the transfer of microbes, if you want, between animals and humans. So the logical extension for that would be that if you're working on a farm where there's a big problem of antimicrobial resistance amongst the farm animals, that the humans working with those animals may have also got a higher carriage of bacteria that contain resistance genes.
And are you discovering take these farmers, for example, that you're working with in the study, are you discovering what they are able to do human health-wise in terms of trying to combat this? You spoke about gut health.
So we're looking into it. So we're analysing the gut health, the microbial health of these humans, if you want. We're doing microbial profiling of their gastrointestinal system through their fecal samples. So we're basically going to be comparing that with the animals, and then with the profile of soils from those same farms as well. But we don't have the data, so we don't know the answer yet. But hopefully in 3 years' time you can have us all back and we'll have better answers for you.
Well, I was just going to say, you give us the timescale, and we will have you back on to talk about it. Because I know we've laughed about fecal samples, but in some senses we shouldn't, because it's so important. And I'm really glad that you have managed to get farmer groups who are willing to see this kind of whole health thing, and willing to go through some minor embarrassment in order to help you with your research. I think it's time to give Eleanor more of an opportunity to tell us about wildlife. Yeah, to me, I suppose, and the dangerous Googling job that I did, humans and livestock kind of cropped up first when it comes to antimicrobial resistance. And I guess it's something we know more about. But Eleanor, wildlife is your area of expertise. So tell us more about why it's important that we're looking into that as well.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that it is much more understudied than the other areas. There's two sort of reasons to look at wildlife. First of all, they can act as sort of sentinel species for ecosystems, especially if they sit at the top of the food chain. So they tend to accumulate a lot of the pollutants in an environment. So people have looked to them to look at other environmental pollutants, but we're starting to look at them, these populations, for understanding AMR spread in the environment as well. So sentinel species can be things like seals. We've looked at seals before. Nuno's done some work on rabbits. Another reason to study wildlife is to understand their role as potential vectors. So this could be carrying antimicrobial resistant bacteria between farms. This could be short range, so that could be insects and rats, rabbits, that kind of thing. But then you can also have long range dissemination as well, and that would bring in things like migratory birds, long range aquatic species. So one of the pieces of work that we're doing, which is funded by the Scottish Government, is to look at geese on Orkney, because over recent years, the geese populations have expanded rapidly. So that's a significant change in biodiversity, and it's thought that that's because of climate change, at least in part. So because of the sort of massive numbers of geese on Orkney, one of the questions that's come up is, does the fecal contamination deriving from the birds cause, and do they carry any microbial risks that could affect livestock? So we've got quite a big project looking at different aspects of this, but one of the things we're interested in is AMR. Do these geese potentially pick up resistance traits or resistant bacteria from one farm and carry it to another? And because there are also migratory birds that come down, is there a potential for introducing new resistant bacteria into these farm populations? It also gives us a chance to develop methods, sort of new technologies to study this. So we've been working closely with the Orkney Goose Management Group and the farming community in Orkney, who've been really supportive. And I have to say, we couldn't do it without them. We need access to farms for samples, but also they help us understand the situation more fully. So that helps us design our studies, but also helps us interpret our results appropriately.
That's really brought up a question for all of you in a sense. And Karen, you've highlighted as well how willing farmers have been to help and contribute and get involved. But is there anything more that we're here today talking about this topic, which is hopefully raising even awareness even further? But is there anything more that we could all be doing to either to help develop farmer understanding, or to help encourage them to get involved and collaborate a bit more? Is there any kind of plea that we can make to people who are listening today?
What was interesting in our study is that we only wanted quite a small number of farms to be involved in our study, like half a dozen really. And the people who were most willing to be involved were organic farmers, like people who had more of a, I guess, or I don't know if it was an awareness or just they were more willing to look into things and maybe think about alternatives and talk about it more. And it was much harder for us to get people who are maybe more intensively farming to actually get involved. And in a way that's a shame for our study, because it means we don't have that comparison. So I think going forward, that would definitely be something that we would want to do, is to get a a bigger range of different farms involved. And I know that it's always difficult. Nobody ever has time to do something extra because everybody's always really pushed, and I fully appreciate that. Like in whatever walk of life you're working, everybody's really pushed for time. But I think the importance of including all aspects of farming is really important, because we still don't really, if we don't have all of the different types of farms included, then we can't make the proper comparisons, and we can't really. So one of the big things about these projects, and they're all linked together, so there's actually 9 projects, or in fact 11 projects really, across the SEFARI funding, Scottish Government funding, that are all looking at this issue in a different way, and we're trying to put them together and make a model to try to see where there could be key intervention points where we can actually really put a brake on spread of AMR or pathogenic bacteria that carry the AMR. And in order to get that full answer, we need to have input from all the different sources, and we're really missing that one bit. So if any intensive farms out there, any farmers who really think, well, maybe I do use more, I feel that I need to use antimicrobials more than I want to use them, would like to get involved, then that would be great.
So it's still open to collaborating with more people. That's really good to hear. And I suppose, the benefits are twofold. The benefits are getting a deeper understanding into your own, if you're a livestock farmer, into your own herd and your own health and welfare plan. But it's also the benefit of knowing and understanding that you're able to make a contribution to wider study and wider understanding, which is difficult to put a benefit, you can't put a cost on that, can you? But actually it's something that in life we all should do our bit to contribute to further the understanding and help the next generation. So yeah, if you are listening, well, we'll put some information in the show notes, and you can get in touch with Karen, and because I think, it's hugely important. Eleanor, you're nodding furiously here. Either you've got something else to say, or you just completely agree with what Karen said.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important for us to get the message out there, because it is quite a difficult thing for people to get their heads around. And I think there's still some misunderstanding that it's actually the bacteria that are resistant to the antibiotics. I think there's quite a big proportion of the population that think it's the humans that are resistant, and it's difficult to get that concept sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think, we need to be better at communicating these ideas more clearly. And I think also it's easier to understand when it's an infectious disease, that if you get that infectious disease, then you get ill. But for AMR, it's just a little bit, it's almost like a hidden epidemic that you don't necessarily, you could be covered in resistant bacteria, but you wouldn't know until you get a wound. And it's that understanding as well. So I think we need to get better at communicating that, and how we communicate that to the farming industry, and also sort of look at the language that we use, and also what can we learn from the farmers, because I'm sure, I think farmer-led initiatives are really important, and it could be that there's something that we could do on farms that wouldn't occur to us as scientists. So engaging farmers and listening to their input as well is really important.
I think that's a great point, because I think scientists can come up with solutions that are completely unworkable on the ground. So it's really important to have that conversation. Then you can work the solution and change it and adapt it and make it into something that's applicable on the ground and isn't going to cost lots of money, and it's just going to improve everything. And I think there are solutions out there. There's like a company that I'm involved with that's got a really neat solution for some of these problems, but it's just getting people to become aware and just changing practice is really difficult sometimes. And I think getting the message out there, as Eleanor said, is really important. And then, I don't know, I think it needs to go back to how farmers learn as well. And I mean, some of the farmers I've spoken to think that the courses on agriculture courses that are existent at the moment maybe need updated as well. And I just think the whole thing needs maybe a bit of revision, actually.
It's only by working together that you can understand each other to be able to take things forward. And it's absolutely not about weeding out bad practices. It's about highlighting the best practices and focusing on those. And I think if there is any fear out there amongst people getting involved in wider research projects like this, is that they need to understand it's not about criticism. It's about working together to find the best solutions. Nuno.
One interesting thing I have found since I'm working here in Scotland is the interest of the farmers about the problem. So in that case, the problem of AMR and what can be done. So in contact, so when we went to a farm for a collection of soil, collection of animal samples like milk, for example, or feces, you see many times the interest of the farmers, so they make a lot of questions or what we can do to improve. And I'm talking about young farmers to very very senior farmers. So yeah, they have this interest as well. Then it's good for
hugely
our
encouraging
research.
for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's also useful to think about the win-wins and the added value of this kind of work. So it goes back to thinking about, diagnostics and vaccines and approaches to improve productivity. It's all linked. And additionally, the methods that we're looking at for surveillance in wildlife, that'll have impact on wildlife diseases and other diseases that could potentially spread to humans and livestock. So it's always useful to think of the added value of the research as well.
Well, I've got one final question, I think, for each of you, if that's okay. And it's prompted by what Karen said about come back and talk to me in 3 years. Let's imagine that we are chatting again in 3 years. We can't predict the future, but if I ask each of you in turn, what do you hope that we will be saying to each other in 3 years' time? Eleanor, I'll maybe come to you first.
Oh my word. I guess the ultimate aim is to pin down certain practices that we know will have an impact and that have robust science behind that. We're not going to solve all the problems in our projects in 3 years, but it's to keep that going. And, we all work very well. We all work together. We all share samples and we communicate really well. So it's keeping that momentum going as well.
Sounds good. Nuno, what do you hope?
Yeah, so I hope in 3 years' time that we have robust data from our project, not only at Moredun, but across to all the institutes with a project related with AMR.
And Karen, finally, last but not least.
Yeah, I agree fully with what Eleanor and Nuno said. I think we would want to have got robust data so that we can see what the best way to reduce the spread of AMR is. And we can only do that by knowing the incidence in the different environments that we're focusing on. And if we can find a best practice that will actually reduce the prevalence of antimicrobial resistance, then that would be the ideal scenario. Hopefully we get there.
And I suppose I would just add to that, from an outsider's perspective, to anybody listening, to say, if you can directly get involved, please get in touch. But even if you feel you can't, just go away and look this up. Research it a little bit. I know I was half joking when I said about Google, because that's where I started, but I ended up down a lot of incredibly useful rabbit holes in terms of being on the James Hutton website and the Moredun website. So actually, just look it up so that you feel more comfortable knowing all you can know about it, and come back in 3 years and listen again to what we're talking about.
Yeah, I can say that combating AMR, we need the effort of everyone, for the farmers, for the research, for the police maker. We need the effort of everyone.
Get involved. Yes, good message.
That's a key point, actually. It's like we're trying to do this research not to say you can never use antimicrobials or antibiotics, but it's to make sure that the antibiotics are still going to be effective against the bugs we need to use them to treat in 30 years' time. Because you mentioned right at the start the global health challenge. That basically is that the worst case scenario is if we let antimicrobial resistance increase, we will no longer be able to treat pathogenic diseases that have become treatable. In the last 50 years of the last century, we almost we were able to treat anything. Whereas now we're going back in time almost.
Go backwards, yes. So the worst case scenario would be we're back 100 years or more ago in terms of our ability to fight this, and we just can't let that
That's
happen.
what we need to avoid.
I think that's a very stark but very important message, Karen. Yeah.
Farmers are doing really great in trying to reduce the use of antimicrobials, and we need to just make sure that that's across the board, that everybody's doing it in clinics, in farms, everywhere, around the world as well.
So Karen, Nuno, Eleanor, thank you very much, all three of you, for joining me. I've learned a lot, and actually you've inspired me to go away and learn a little bit more. And I hope that our listeners have either learned something or been inspired to get involved. And I wish you loads of luck with your ongoing research, and let's make a date for 3 years' time. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This episode is part of an on-farm mini-series in partnership with SEFARI, which is the Scottish Environment, Food and Agriculture Research Institutions, made up of 6 globally renowned institutions providing research and expertise to Scotland's agriculture, environment and food communities. They are, and we'll name check them all because it's really lovely to have been involved with them, and they absolutely deserve it. Aberdeen University's Rowett Institute, our old friends at the Moredun Research Institute, SRUC, or Scotland's Rural College, Biomathematics and Statistics Scotland, or BIOS, the James Hutton Institute, and the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh. There are links in the show notes to SEFARI so that you can find out more if you need to, but I hope you enjoyed that episode. Really lovely to listen to, and we are really enjoying working with SEFARI on this project.